Most people think earning a high salary means financial success, but across the United States and Europe, thousands of smart professionals in their 30s earn $90,000 a year and still feel completely broke. Not because they're careless, but because of a financial trap almost nobody notices until it's too late. Have you ever noticed something strange about modern professional life? You meet someone who seems to be doing everything right. They went to a good university, they built a respectable career. They earn somewhere between $70,000 and $120,000 a year. From the outside, it looks like they should be financially comfortable. But when you talk to them honestly, something feels off. Their bank balance is thin, their savings account barely moves, and retirement feels like a distant, abstract idea. So the question becomes uncomfortable. How can intelligent, educated professionals reach their 30s, earning solid incomes, and still feel financially stuck? This situation is far more common than most people realize. Imagine a typical scenario in a large American or European city. A 32-year-old marketing manager in Chicago, or a software tester in Manchester, or a financial analyst in Toronto. Their salary might be around $90,000 a year. At first glance, that sounds like success. But after taxes, the number quietly changes. In many places across the United States and Europe, the take-home income from a $90,000 salary might fall closer to about $5,000 per month. Now watch what happens next. Rent in a decent neighborhood, $1,900. A car payment, $520. Insurance, fuel, and parking, another $350. Student loan payments, $400. Groceries, utilities, internet, and phone, about $700. And then there are the small lifestyle upgrades that slowly become normal. A few restaurant dinners each week, streaming services, weekend trips, online shopping, subscriptions nobody remembers signing up for. Another $800 quietly disappears. Suddenly, the $5,000 monthly income has almost vanished. And this person hasn't done anything irresponsible. They didn't gamble their money away. They didn't make reckless financial decisions. They simply lived the lifestyle that their environment quietly encouraged. This is where the real issue begins. The mistake isn't usually about spending too much in one dramatic moment. It's about something much quieter. Most professionals allow their lifestyle to grow at exactly the same speed as their income. Economists sometimes call this lifestyle inflation, but in reality, it's more psychological than economic. When income increases, expectations increase with it. A slightly better apartment feels justified. A newer car feels reasonable. Vacations feel necessary after long work weeks. And because everyone around you seems to live the same way, the spending doesn't feel excessive. It feels normal. But the math quietly tells a different story. Imagine two professionals who both earn $90,000. One spends nearly everything each month. The other consistently invests $1,000 per month into a basic index fund. Nothing complicated, no risky strategies, just $1,000 invested monthly with an average long-term return of around 7%. After 25 years, that monthly investment grows to roughly $790,000. Not because of brilliant financial tricks, simply because time and compounding quietly did their job. Now imagine the first professional. Same career, same intelligence, same salary, but they saved almost nothing during their 30s. By the time they reach their mid-40s, the gap between these two lives becomes enormous. And it didn't happen because one person was smarter. It happened because one person understood a simple but uncomfortable truth. Income does not create wealth. The gap between income and spending does. The psychology behind this trap is surprisingly powerful. Most professionals measure success through visible signals. A nicer apartment, a newer car, more travel photos. These signals reassure us that our hard work is paying off. But wealth operates on the opposite principle. Real financial stability is usually invisible. It looks like driving a perfectly normal car for 10 years. It looks like living in an apartment that costs slightly less than you could afford. It looks boring. And that's why it's so rare. Because socially, boring financial behavior doesn't receive much attention. Financially intelligent people often see money differently. They don't treat income as permission to upgrade life every year. Instead, they see income as a tool for building future freedom. Every raise becomes a decision point. Part of the increase improves life slightly, but another portion quietly builds assets. Over time, this creates a different financial trajectory. By their late 30s or early 40s, the compounding begins to show up. Investment accounts start growing faster than monthly contributions. Financial stress begins to shrink, and the person who once appeared behind financially starts to move ahead. Not dramatically, but steadily. The uncomfortable reality is that most professionals are not poor because they earn too little. They struggle because modern lifestyles expand fast enough to consume almost any income, and because the system around them, housing markets, credit systems, social expectations, quietly pushes spending upward every year. Understanding this doesn't require guilt or extreme frugality. It simply requires awareness. When someone sees the numbers clearly, their financial decisions naturally start to change. They begin asking different questions. Not what can I afford this year, but what kind of life do I want 20 years from now? That small shift in thinking often makes all the difference. Many people assume financial pressure in their 30s is temporary. They believe things will naturally improve with time. After all, careers usually progress, salaries increase, promotions happen. But something subtle tends to happen alongside those promotions. Expenses rise at almost the same pace. A promotion from $90,000 to $110,000 feels like a major step forward, and in many ways it is. But after taxes, that additional income might translate to roughly $900 or $1,000 more per month. Now watch what usually happens next. The apartment upgrade that felt slightly too expensive before suddenly feels reasonable. The older car begins to feel outdated. Maybe the vacations become a little more ambitious. None of these decisions feel irrational on their own, but collectively they quietly absorb the entire raise. 5 years later, the person earning $110,000 often feels almost exactly the same financial pressure they felt at $90,000. The lifestyle simply scaled upward. This is one of the reasons many professionals reach their mid-30s with impressive resumes but surprisingly little net worth. Not because they failed, but because the financial system they operate in rewards consumption far more visibly than saving. Banks happily offer larger mortgages. Car companies design financing plans that stretch payments over longer periods. Credit cards normalize carrying balances month to month. None of these systems require someone to make a reckless decision. They simply make slightly higher spending extremely easy. And over time, easy decisions become permanent habits. There is also a deeper psychological factor. In your early 20s, comparisons usually revolve around experiences. Friends compare trips, concerts, and social moments. But by the early 30s, the comparisons quietly shift. Now it becomes about homes, cars, neighborhoods, and lifestyle stability. People start measuring adulthood through visible milestones: a certain type of apartment, a certain type of car, a certain type of vacation. These milestones create a subtle pressure that rarely gets discussed openly. No one says it directly, but the message is always there. If you are successful, your life should look like this. For many professionals, matching that image slowly becomes the default goal, and that goal is expensive. Meanwhile, wealth building works according to a completely different timeline. During the first 10 years of saving and investing, progress feels slow. Account balances grow gradually. The numbers don't look impressive yet, which makes it psychologically easy to delay investing. Many people tell themselves they will start later, when income is higher. But this delay quietly removes the most valuable resource in finance: time. The early years of compounding often matter far more than the later ones. Someone who begins investing consistently at 25 has a dramatically different outcome from someone who starts at 35, even if the second person eventually earns more money. This isn't because of discipline alone. It's because compound growth needs time to work, and time cannot be recovered later. Another subtle issue is how professionals think about debt. In many Western economies, debt has been normalized to an extraordinary degree. Student loans are expected. Car financing is standard. Mortgages stretch for 25 or even 30 years. Individually, these decisions may be reasonable. Education often requires borrowing. Housing markets are expensive. Transportation is necessary. But the combined effect of multiple long-term payments creates something powerful: a financial structure. Each month, a large portion of income is already committed before the month even begins. This structure limits flexibility. It makes saving harder, and it makes people feel trapped even when their incomes are relatively high. Interestingly, financially stable people often approach these same decisions with a slightly different mindset. They rarely ask, what is the maximum I can afford? Instead, they ask a quieter question: what level of spending still leaves me room to build assets? This question changes everything, because when someone consistently preserves that gap between income and spending, wealth begins to grow almost automatically. Not dramatically at first, but gradually, and eventually the difference becomes visible. By their 40s, some professionals suddenly notice that a few people in their social circle seem much less financially stressed. They aren't necessarily earning the most, but they have something others don't: options. The option to change careers, the option to reduce work hours, the option to handle unexpected expenses without panic. Those options didn't appear
appear suddenly. They were built quietly over years of small financial decisions. Perhaps the most important realization is this: financial intelligence is rarely about complex strategies. It's usually about understanding simple numbers and resisting social pressure. It means recognizing that a high income and real wealth are not the same thing. It means noticing how easily lifestyle expectations expand. And it means realizing that financial freedom is often created through consistency rather than dramatic action. Once people see this clearly, their behavior often changes naturally, not because they feel guilty, but because the math becomes impossible to ignore. There is another quiet pattern that begins to appear as professionals move deeper into their 30s. At some point, the financial pressure stops feeling temporary. The monthly obligations become permanent parts of life. The rent or mortgage payment, the car payment, the student loan payment. Each one individually makes sense, but together they create something that many people never expected when they first entered their careers: a financial treadmill. You work hard, your income arrives, and almost all of it immediately flows back out into fixed expenses. And because those expenses are tied to long-term contracts, leases, loans, mortgages, adjusting them later becomes surprisingly difficult. So people adapt. They keep working, they keep paying, and they quietly accept that financial stress is simply part of adulthood. What makes this situation even more interesting is that many professionals genuinely believe they are doing well financially, and in some ways they are. Compared to the national average income, they may be earning far more. Compared to their friends from university, they may even appear successful. But financial comfort is rarely determined by income alone. It is determined by margin. Margin is the space between what you earn and what your life costs. Without margin, even a six-figure income can feel tight. With margin, even a modest income can feel stable. But the problem is that modern professional culture often erodes that margin without people noticing. Every year brings slightly higher expectations, a slightly better neighborhood, a slightly nicer car.
By the time many professionals reach their late 30s, something subtle begins to shift in how they think about money. In their 20s and early 30s, financial decisions were often guided by momentum. The focus was on building a career, increasing income, and keeping up with the lifestyle that seemed to define adulthood. But after a decade of working, a different kind of awareness starts to appear. People begin to notice patterns. They notice that some colleagues who earn similar salaries seem far less stressed about money. They notice that certain friends are able to take career breaks, start businesses, or relocate without panic. And the question quietly emerges again: what exactly is the difference? Because the income numbers often look surprisingly similar. The difference is rarely visible in daily life. It doesn't usually show up in clothing, cars, or vacations. It shows up in balance sheets. One professional may have spent 10 years gradually increasing their lifestyle. The other may have spent 10 years gradually increasing their assets. From the outside, these two lives can look nearly identical. Both people go to work every day, both earn respectable incomes, both live in comfortable environments. But beneath the surface, the financial structures of their lives are completely different. One life is supported entirely by income. The other life is slowly being supported by assets. And that difference compounds every year. This is where the real power of financial thinking begins to reveal itself. Assets behave very differently from salaries. A salary requires constant effort. Every dollar must be earned through time, attention, and energy. Assets, however, operate on a different system. They grow, they generate returns, they expand without requiring additional working hours. At first, this growth feels small. A few $1,000s in annual investment returns may not seem dramatic, but after many years, those returns begin to accelerate. A portfolio that once grew by a few thousand per year may begin growing by 20,000, then 50,000. Eventually, the growth of assets can begin to rival the growth of a salary itself. This is the moment when financial pressure often begins to fade, not because someone suddenly worked harder, but because their money finally began working alongside them. For professionals who spent most of their 30s simply maintaining an expensive lifestyle, reaching this stage becomes much more difficult. Not impossible, but slower, because compounding thrives on time, and time, once passed, cannot be recreated. This is why the financial patterns of the early career years matter so much. Not because people must live extremely frugal lives, but because small, consistent financial gaps between income and spending eventually turn into something powerful. A gap of a few $100s per month may seem insignificant today, but over 20 years, that gap can reshape an entire financial future. Interestingly, people who become financially stable rarely describe the process as dramatic. There is no single breakthrough moment, no overnight transformation. Instead, the change feels gradual. A savings account grows, investment balances slowly increase, debt balances quietly shrink. And one day, the person realizes something surprising. They are no longer worried about the next unexpected expense. That sense of stability didn't arrive through luck. It arrived through years of calm, rational decisions that rarely felt exciting at the time. Perhaps that is the most important perspective for modern professionals. Financial intelligence is not about outsmarting markets or discovering hidden tricks. It is about understanding how ordinary financial behavior compounds over long periods of time. Small decisions repeated for many years eventually create large outcomes, both positive and negative. The professionals who build long-term stability are rarely the ones making dramatic financial moves. They are usually the ones quietly protecting the gap between what they earn and what they spend. Year after year, promotion after promotion. Lifestyle pressures come and go, but that gap remains. And over time, it becomes the foundation of real wealth. There is also a quieter realization that tends to arrive as people approach their early 40s. For many professionals, the first 15 or 20 years of working life passed surprisingly quickly. University feels recent. The first job still feels close in memory. But suddenly, 20 decades of income have already come and gone. And that moment often creates a simple but powerful question. Where did all that money go? This question is not about regret. It is about awareness. Because when people begin to mentally add up the total income they have earned since their early 20s, the number can be surprisingly large. Someone earning an average of $75,000 a year for 15 years has already earned more than $1 million in lifetime income. For professionals earning closer to six figures, that number can be far higher. Yet many people arrive at their late 30s with only a small fraction of that amount saved or invested. Not because they were irresponsible, but because most of that income quietly flowed through the structure of modern life. Housing, transportation, taxes, debt payments, daily living costs, lifestyle upgrades. Over time, the system absorbs almost everything. This is why financial awareness tends to feel different in the second half of a career. Earlier in life, income feels like progress. Later in life, people start paying more attention to what remains after income has been spent. They begin looking at net worth rather than salary, because net worth tells a different story. Salary describes what you earn this year. Net worth describes what your past years have built. And sometimes those two numbers tell very different narratives. A professional earning $120,000 with minimal savings may actually be in a weaker long-term position than someone earning $80,000 who has consistently invested for 20 years. Income creates the potential for wealth, but only consistent ownership of assets turns that potential into reality. Another subtle change occurs as people watch older generations. In their 20s and early 30s, retirement feels like an abstract concept, something that belongs to parents or grandparents. But as professionals move through their late 30s, they start seeing real examples around them. Some older colleagues seem calm about retirement. They speak about reducing work hours or stepping away entirely. Others appear anxious. They worry about market downturns, medical expenses, or continuing to work longer than they expected. And when people observe these two paths closely, the difference often traces back decades. The calm retirements usually come from long stretches of consistent investing, not dramatic wealth, not high-risk strategies, just patient accumulation over many years. Meanwhile, the anxious retirements often come from the opposite pattern, years of strong income but very little asset building. The financial consequences only become visible much later. This is why the conversation about professionals staying broke in their 30s is really not about the 30s themselves. It's about trajectory. The financial direction that becomes established during that decade often continues for the rest of a career. A professional who consistently spends nearly everything they earn will likely continue doing so at higher income levels. And a professional who consistently builds assets early often finds that the process becomes easier over time, because once investments reach a certain size, they begin contributing more growth than the person's monthly deposits. At that point, wealth building starts to feel less like effort and more like momentum. The interesting part is that this shift doesn't require extreme financial discipline. It usually requires only a modest difference in behavior. Two people earning the same salary may live nearly identical lives. One saves 10% of their income, the other saves almost nothing. In the short term, the difference between these two lifestyles may be barely noticeable, but over 20 or 30 years, the outcomes diverge dramatically. One life slowly accumulates security and flexibility. The other remains dependent on continuous income, and that dependency becomes heavier as time passes. So when people ask why smart professionals sometimes feel broke in their 30s, the answer is rarely about intelligence or effort. It's about the invisible structure of modern financial life. Income rises, lifestyle expectations rise alongside it. Debt systems make spending easy, and wealth building quietly gets postponed year after year, until eventually people begin asking deeper questions about how money actually works. Those questions arrive later than expected, but once they appear, they tend to reshape how people think about their financial future. Not with panic, not with extreme frugality, just with a clearer understanding of the numbers and the long-term consequences of everyday choices. Over time, something interesting happens to people who begin thinking about money this way. Their relationship with income slowly changes. Early in a career, income feels like the center of financial life. A higher salary means progress. A promotion means stability. A raise feels like a solution. But after years of observing how money flows through everyday life, many financially thoughtful professionals begin to see income differently. Income is not the destination, it's simply the fuel. The real question becomes what that